"Don't kick me, I'm pregnant." The words froze the entire ballroom. The maid knelt on the marble floor, her uniform stained with spilled wine, one trembling hand protecting her belly. The bride let out a cold laugh. Pregnant? With who? Don't tell me you dreamed your way into the billionaire's bed." Laughter rippled through the crowd, sharp and cruel. But seconds later, when the grand doors swung open and the groom stepped in, every sound died. The powerful man stopped in his tracks, his voice breaking as he said, "Stop. She's my wife." Celeste Avenor stayed on her knees for a moment longer, her dark hair falling loose from its plain bun, brushing the floor. Her face pale and bare of makeup didn't flinch. The room was a glittering cage of crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed tables packed with people who'd spent more on their shoes than most spend on rent. She didn't belong here, not in their eyes. Her faded black uniform, the kind you'd see on any hotel staff, screamed it. Her hands, rough from work, clutched the rag she'd been using to clean the spill. But her eyes, those steady hazel eyes, held something else. Something that made the laughter falter just for a second before it roared back. The bride Aurelia Vale stood at the center of it all, her white gown catching the light like a beacon of entitlement. Her sharp cheekbones and icy blue eyes made her look like she'd been carved from marble, beautiful but untouchable. She tilted her head, her diamond tiara glinting, and sneered. "Oh, honey, you're pregnant. That's adorable. Who's the father?" "The busboy." The crowd erupted again, a wave of snickers and whispers. Aurelia's mother, Miranda Vale, stood nearby, her lips pursed in a thin, smug line. She was 54, draped in a silk dress that cost a fortune, her gray-streaked hair pulled tight to show off her surgically perfect face. She didn't laugh. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to make the air heavy with judgment. A server in a crisp white shirt, his face flushed with nerves, hurried past Celeste, nearly tripping over her. He dropped a tray of champagne flutes, the crash echoing through the room. Heads turned and the crowd's laughter sharpened. "Look at that!" A woman in a sequined gown muttered, her voice loud enough to carry. "Even the help can't handle her mess." The server scrambled to pick up the shards, but Miranda waved him off. Her eyes locked on Celeste. "Leave it," she said, her tone icy. "Let her clean it. It's what she's good for." Celeste's fingers tightened on the rag, but she didn't move. Her gaze flicked to the broken glass, then back to Miranda. She set the rag down deliberate and stood her movements slow, like she was measuring every second. "I'll clean it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But not because you told me to." The room stilled just for a moment, as if her words had shifted the air. Celeste didn't answer. She pushed herself up slow and careful, one hand still on her belly. The rag dropped to the floor forgotten. She smoothed her skirt, her movements deliberate, like she was reminding herself to breathe. The room kept laughing, but she didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than their noise. And then from the edge of the crowd, a man in a tailored suit, some hedge fund guy with slicked back hair and a Rolex that screamed new money, stepped forward. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with fake pity. "Maybe you should stick to cleaning and leave the fairy tales to someone else." He flicked a crumpled napkin at her feet like she was supposed to pick it up. She didn't. She looked at him just for a moment, her eyes locking onto his. "Keep your napkin," she said, her voice low but clear. The words weren't loud, but they cut. The man blinked, his smirk fading, and he stepped back suddenly, unsure. The crowd didn't notice, too busy with their own jokes, but that moment hung there sharp and real like a crack in glass. A woman nearby, her earrings dangling like chandeliers, leaned toward her friend and whispered loud enough for Celeste to hear, "She's got some nerve talking back like that." Her friend nodded, sipping her drink. "Probably thinks she's special because she's pregnant." Pathetic. Celeste's hand paused on her skirt, her fingers brushing the fabric, but her face stayed steady like she hadn't heard a word. The ballroom was a storm of noise, now a feeding frenzy. Miranda Vale stepped closer, her heels clicking on the marble like gunfire. "You," she said, pointing a manicured finger at Celeste. "You were in Aurelia's class at St. Catherine's, weren't you? The scholarship girl, always scribbling in that sketchbook, thinking you were an artist." Her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, and the crowd ate it up. "Look at you now, serving wine at my daughter's wedding. How far you've fallen." She turned to the guests, her smile sharp as a blade. "Isn't it sad? Some people just don't know their place." Aurelia joined in, her voice colder, meaner. "What was it you used to say, Celeste? That you'd be a famous painter someday? Guess you're better at pouring drinks than painting dreams." The crowd laughed harder, a few clapping like it was a performance. Celeste stood there, her hands still, her face unreadable. She didn't flinch, didn't blush, didn't look away. But her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of her skirt, just enough to show she felt the sting. Then another guest, a woman in a red dress with lips painted to match, leaned in. "Sweetie, that uniform's a choice, isn't it? You could at least try to look like you belong here." She paused, then added, "Oh wait, you don't..." A man in a velvet blazer, his face flushed from too much wine, pushed through the crowd, holding up his phone like a trophy. "This is gold," he said, grinning as he filmed Celeste. "The maid who thinks she's somebody. This'll go viral by morning." He zoomed in on her stained uniform, her pale face, the way her hand rested on her belly. The crowd parted for him, some cheering him on, others adding their own jabs. "Yeah, get her face in there," a woman shouted, her voice slurred. Celeste didn't move, but her eyes flicked to the phone, then back to the man. "You done?" she asked, her voice so calm it made him falter. He lowered the phone just for a second before laughing it off. "Oh, she's feisty," he said, turning to the crowd for approval. The man from earlier, the hedge fund guy, wasn't done. He stepped forward again, holding a glass of wine. "Oops," he said, tipping it just enough to spill red across the floor, right at Celeste's feet. "Clean it up, darling. That's what you're here for, right?" He grinned, waiting for her to bend down. The crowd watched, hungry for her to break. She looked at the spill, then at him. Her voice was steady, almost soft. "I'm pregnant, sir." "I don't bend that way." The room went quiet for a heartbeat, then exploded in laughter again. Pregnant?" The woman in red gasped, clutching her pearls like it was a punchline. "Oh, that's rich." "Who's the father?" "Some nobody from the kitchen." Celeste knelt slowly, not because she was told to, but because she chose to. She picked up the rag, her movements careful, deliberate. The crowd kept talking, their voices overlapping, each one trying to outdo the last. "She probably thinks she's Cinderella," someone said. "More like the help who got knocked up," another added. Miranda's laugh was the loudest, sharp and practiced, like she'd spent years perfecting it. But as Celeste wiped the floor, something caught the light. A glint from Aurelia's hand. A diamond ring, its design sharp and unique, like nothing you'd see in a store. Celeste froze just for a second, her hand still on the rag. She stared at the ring, her lips parting slightly like she'd seen a ghost. The ring wasn't just any ring. Its edges were etched with a pattern of stars, faint but unmistakable, catching the chandelier light in a way that felt personal, like a memory carved in stone. Celeste's hand trembled just slightly as she stood. Her eyes stayed on Aurelia's hand, tracing the familiar design. Years ago she'd sat in a quiet room, Draven's hand over hers, as he slid that same ring onto her finger. The moment had been private, sacred, away from the world's noise. Now it was on Aurelia's hand, gleaming like a stolen promise. The crowd didn't notice her pause, but a woman at a nearby table, her face softened by age, caught Celeste's gaze. She frowned, her fingers tightening on her wine glass like she sensed something was wrong. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, looking at the hedge fund guy, "my mom has that ring." The words didn't make sense to him or to anyone else. They sounded like a mistake, like something a confused girl would say. Ryan Holt, the MC for the night, a wiry man with a fake tan and a smile like a used car salesman, let out a bark of laughter. "Your mom? Sweetheart, your mom's probably cleaning houses, not wearing diamonds." The crowd roared again, but Celeste didn't look at him. She stood, her hands steady, and walked toward the exit. The room buzzed with confusion, whispers replacing laughter. What did she mean? Why that ring? Miranda's smile faltered just for a moment, her eyes narrowing. A young waiter, barely out of his teens, hovered near the door, his tray shaking in his hands. He'd been watching the whole scene, his face pale, his eyes darting between Celeste and the crowd. As she passed him, he stepped forward hesitant and pressed a napkin into her hand. "You dropped this," he said, his voice barely audible. But it wasn't her napkin. Tucked inside was a note scribbled in hasty pen. "I know who you are. Stay strong." Celeste paused, her fingers closing around the paper. She didn't look at him, didn't unfold it, but slipped it into her pocket. The crowd didn't see, too busy laughing, but the waiter's eyes followed her wide, with something like awe. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to make his hands shake. Celeste didn't rush. She didn't run. She walked her steps, even her head high. But as she reached the door, Miranda's voice cut through the noise. Security. She snapped, her tone sharp enough to make heads turn. "Get that girl out of here. She's ruining my daughter's wedding." Two guards in black suits appeared moving fast, their hands already reaching for Celeste. She didn't fight them. She let them grab her arms, but her eyes stayed on Miranda. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle. The guards hesitated just for a second, but Miranda waved them on. "Out. Now." Outside, the air was cold, the kind that bites at your skin. Celeste stood on the hotel steps, her breath visible in the night. The guards let her go, one of them muttering an apology under his breath. She didn't respond. She just adjusted her coat, a plain wool thing that looked like it came from a thrift store. A woman in a fur stole her face tight, with Botox stepped out after her, her heels clicking loudly. "You really thought you could crash this wedding?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're embarrassing yourself." She tossed her cigarette to the ground, grinding it under her heel right near Celeste's feet. Celeste didn't flinch. She bent down, picked up the cigarette butt, and dropped it into a nearby trash can. "This isn't your floor to dirty," she said, her voice steady. The woman's jaw dropped, her face reddening as she stormed back inside. Another guest, a man with a beard and a suit too tight for his frame, stepped out holding a $20 bill. "Here," he said, tossing it at her feet. "Buy some milk for that kid of yours. You'll need it." The bill fluttered to the ground, caught in a gust of wind. Celeste didn't pick it up. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "You'll regret that," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the wind. The man laughed, but it was nervous, his eyes darting back to the ballroom. He didn't know why her words made his stomach twist, but they did. He shoved his hands in his pockets and hurried back inside, his bravado gone. Aurelia appeared at the door, her gown trailing behind her like a storm cloud. She held a wine glass half empty, and her eyes were blazing. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin my day?" she said, her voice shaking with rage. She threw the glass not at Celeste, but close enough to make a point. It shattered on the steps, red wine splashing across the stone. Celeste stumbled, her foot catching on the edge of a step, and she fell hard, one hand flying to her belly. The crowd inside gasped, some filming with their phones, others whispering. Ryan's voice boomed from the ballroom, amplified by his mic. "Now that's a show. Perfect for the live stream folks." He laughed, but it was forced, like he knew something was off. A hotel staff member, an older woman with gray hair tied back, rushed out with a towel, her face creased with worry. She knelt beside Celeste, ignoring the crowd, and pressed the towel against her scraped knee. "You okay, honey?" She whispered, her voice soft like a mother's. Celeste nodded, her hands still on her belly, her breath shallow. The woman glanced at the shattered glass, then at Aurelia, her eyes narrowing. "You should be ashamed," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Aurelia scoffed, but her hands shook as she turned away. The staff member helped Celeste to her feet, her touch gentle but firm, like she'd seen too much cruelty in her years to stay silent. Celeste pushed herself up at her lip, bleeding from the fall. She wiped it with the back of her hand, her eyes locking onto Aurelia's. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, despite the blood. "Now everyone will know who's wearing someone else's ring." The words landed like a slap. Aurelia froze, her hand flying to the diamond on her finger. The crowd's whispers grew louder, phones still recording. Ryan's laugh cut off mid-breath, his face paling. Miranda pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of fury. "You little," she started, but Celeste was already turning, walking down the steps, her coat pulled tight around her. Inside the ballroom was chaos. A young woman in a press badge, probably from some finance magazine, was typing furiously on her phone. She'd caught Celeste's words about the ring and was already posting. "Is Draven Corrin's diamond ring spotted at Vale Wedding?" The post hit the internet like a spark in dry grass. Within 10 minutes, it had thousands of shares, comments flooding in. Guests in the ballroom started checking their phones, their murmurs growing louder. "Draven's married," one woman whispered to her friend, her voice sharp with disbelief. "To who?" Another guest, a man with a silk tie and a nervous laugh, leaned over to Miranda. "This is a joke, right? That girl's delusional." Miranda's face was pale now, her hands trembling as she clutched her champagne flute. She snapped at Ryan, "Turn off the cameras, all of them. Now," but Ryan just stood there, his phone in hand, scrolling through the comments piling up online. It was too late. The story was out. A man in a corner, older with a weathered face and a suit that didn't quite fit, watched the chaos unfold. He'd been quiet all night, nursing a single drink, his eyes following Celeste from the moment she'd walked in. He pulled out a small notebook, flipping through pages filled with sketches. Stars just like the ones on the ring. He'd designed it years ago for a young couple who would come to his shop, their love quiet but fierce. He looked at Celeste now, his hands shaking as he realized who she was. He stepped forward trying to reach her, but the crowd pushed him back, their voices drowning out his quiet, "That's her ring." No one heard him, but his eyes stayed on Celeste like he was seeing a promise kept. The guards came back moving faster this time, their faces hard. They grabbed Celeste's arms, pulling her toward the street. Miranda followed them out, her voice rising to a shriek. "You're trash." She spat her words echoing off the hotel's stone facade. "You'll never set foot in our world again." Aurelia was right behind her, her eyes wild, her tiara crooked now. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a wad of cash, and threw it at Celeste. The bills scattered across the steps like leaves. "Take it," Aurelia said, her voice venomous. "Compensation for your embarrassment." Celeste didn't touch the money. She stood there, her face calm, her hands still on her belly. A crowd had gathered outside, now some filming with their phones, others just watching. The caption on one video already read, "Maid claims she's Billionaire's wife." A teenage girl, part of the catering staff, slipped through the crowd, her eyes wide with fear and anger. She'd been watching from the sidelines, her apron stained from hours of work. She knelt quickly gathering the scattered bills and pressed them back into Celeste's hand. "You don't need their pity," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. Celeste looked at her surprised, then nodded, slipping the money into her pocket. The girl stood glaring at Aurelia, who scoffed and turned away. The crowd didn't notice the exchange, but it was a small act of defiance, a spark of solidarity in a sea of cruelty. Celeste's fingers tightened around the bills, her face softening for the first time that night. Celeste slipped again, her knees hitting the stone steps. Pain shot through her sharp and real, but she kept her hand on her belly, protecting it. The crowd's laughter was gone now, replaced by a tense, buzzing silence. She looked up at Miranda, at Aurelia, at the phones pointed at her. Blood still trickled from her lips, staining her chin. She spoke, her voice soft but clear. "You just made the biggest mistake of your lives." The words hung in the air, heavy, final. The guards stepped back, unsure. The crowd shifted, some looking away, others leaning closer. Celeste stood slow and careful and walked down the final steps, her coat flapping in the wind. A street musician, his guitar case open on the sidewalk, had been playing softly nearby, his music drowned out by the chaos. He stopped strumming when Celeste felt his fingers frozen on the strings. As she stood, he started playing again, a slow, mournful tune that seemed to follow her steps. The crowd didn't notice, but Celeste paused just for a moment, her eyes meeting his. She didn't smile, but she nodded, a small gesture that made him play louder, his music a quiet rebellion against the cruelty around them. The notes carried her down the steps like a shield no one else could see. Then it came, the sound of engines low and powerful like a storm rolling in. A line of black SUVs pulled up to the hotel, their doors gleaming under the streetlights. The lead vehicle stopped and the door opened. Draven Corin stepped out, his face like stone, his dark suit sharp against the night. He was 32, tall with a presence that didn't need words. His eyes found Celeste immediately, and he moved through the crowd, parting it like water. He reached her, his hands gentle as he helped her stand. "She's not a maid," he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the crowd. "She's my wife." The words hit like a shockwave. The cameras kept rolling, the live stream still active. Miranda stumbled back, her hand on her chest, her voice a whisper. "No, that's not possible." A woman in the crowd, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses, gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. She'd been silent all night, sipping her drink, watching the drama unfold like it was a show. But now her hands shook her sunglasses, slipping down her nose. She'd known Draven years ago, at a quiet dinner where he had spoken of a woman he loved, a woman no one else saw. She looked at Celeste now, her plain coat, her steady eyes, and whispered to herself, "It's her." The realization hit her like a punch, and she turned away, slipping into the crowd, her heels clicking as she fled the truth she couldn't face. Aurelia's face twisted, her voice rising to a scream. "You're lying," she shouted, her hands clenched into fists. "She's nobody. She can't be." Miranda tried to laugh, but it came out weak, forced. "This is just bad PR, isn't it, Draven? A stunt." She looked at him, desperate for him to agree, but Draven didn't even glance her way. His eyes stayed on Celeste, his hand steady on her arm. Ryan tried to step in, his mic still clipped to his jacket, but one of Draven's security team, a broad man in a black suit, blocked him with a single step. The crowd was unraveling now, guests slipping toward the exits, their faces tight with fear. The press was everywhere, their cameras flashing their headlines already forming Billionaire defends, pregnant maid at veil wedding. A photographer, his camera slung around his neck, pushed through the crowd, his lens trained on Celeste and Draven. He'd been hired to capture the wedding's glamour, but now he was chasing a different story. He snapped a photo, the flash catching Celeste's face, her bloodied lip, her calm eyes. The image would be everywhere by morning, a symbol of something bigger than the wedding itself. He lowered his camera, his hands shaking, and muttered, "This is going to change everything." Celeste didn't notice him, but Draven did, his eyes narrowing for a split second before returning to her. Celeste didn't speak. She didn't need to. She stood there, her hand in Draven's, her face calm despite the blood, the pain, the chaos. The ring on Aurelia's finger seemed to glow brighter now, a beacon of truth no one could ignore. Draven turned to the crowd, his voice steady, commanding. "This morning I bought out Vale Industries." He paused, letting the words sink in. A screen behind him lit up, showing contract signatures, proof of the deal. Miranda froze, her glass slipping from her hand, shattering on the floor. Aurelia's face went white, her gown sagging like it was too heavy for her now. The empire they'd built, the name they had protected it, was gone. Celeste looked at them, her voice soft but piercing. "Sometimes God makes you kneel just so you can see the ground you forced others to touch." A man in a gray suit, his tie loosened, stood near the back, his face pale as he watched the screen. He was a Vale Industries board member, one of Miranda's loyalists, but now his hands were sweating, his phone buzzing with urgent messages from shareholders. He'd dismissed Celeste earlier, laughing when she'd fallen. Now he couldn't meet her eyes. He slipped his phone into his pocket, his fingers fumbling, and backed toward the exit, his career crumbling with every step. The crowd didn't notice him leave, but Celeste's gaze flickered his way just for a moment, like she knew exactly who he was. The ballroom was a graveyard now, the party dead. Guests fled their heels, clicking their phones still buzzing with notifications. The live stream was everywhere, the story unstoppable. Miranda's scream broke the silence. "She's seduced you," she shouted, pointing at Celeste. "That child isn't yours." Aurelia lunged forward, her gown tearing as she raised a hand to strike. Draven stepped between them, his arm a shield, and Aurelia stopped, her hand trembling in midair. Ryan, desperate to save face, grabbed his phone and started a new live stream, stammering an apology to the public. But his mic was still hot, broadcasting every word of Miranda's accusations, Aurelia's rage, the whole collapse of their world. A security guard, the one who'd apologized to Celeste earlier, stood at the edge of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. He'd seen a lot in his years working events like this entitlement cruelty power plays, but nothing like this. He watched Draven shield Celeste, his jaw tightening. He'd been the one to let Draven's team in, recognizing the billionaire's face from a grainy photo he'd seen months ago. He stepped forward now, quietly directing his team to clear a path for Celeste and Draven, his small act of respect, unnoticed by the crowd, but steady like a promise kept. The crowd thinned, the ballroom emptying. Only Celeste and Draven remained standing in the center of the chaos. She clutched her belly, her breaths coming short, her face tight with pain. Blood stained her uniform, now seeping through the fabric. No one noticed at first. They were too busy running, hiding, saving themselves. But Draven saw it. His face changed, his calm breaking. He scooped her up of his arms, strong but gentle, and carried her to the middle of the ballroom where the light was brightest. A nurse off duty and dragged to the wedding by her cousin pushed through the remaining guests, her face set with purpose. She'd been watching from the back, her medical bag tucked under her seat. She knelt beside Celeste, her hands steady as she checked her pulse, her breathing. "She's in labor," she said, her voice calm but urgent. She looked at Draven, her eyes sharp. "We need to move her now." The crowd parted, their phones still out, but the nurse didn't care. She guided Draven, her hands quick, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. Celeste gripped her hand, her face pale but steady, trusting her without a word. Pain hit Celeste, hard, sharp waves that made her gasp. She gripped Draven's arm, her nails digging in. He knelt beside her, ignoring the cameras, the whispers, the world. "Our son," he said, his voice clear, carrying over the noise. "He'll carry the Corrin name, the only true heir." The crowd stilled, the camera zooming in. Then it came, a cry, small but fierce, piercing the air. A baby born right there on the ballroom floor, his tiny voice louder than any insult, any lie. The press went wild, their headlines screaming billionaires airborne amid wedding betrayal. A janitor, his broom propped against the wall, stood frozen at the edge of the room. He'd been cleaning up spills all night, invisible to the guests. But now he watched Celeste, her baby's cry echoing in his ears. He had lost a daughter years ago, her face flashing in his mind as he saw Celeste's strength. He stepped forward unnoticed and swept away the broken glass near her, his hands steady, his eyes wet. It was a small act, but it cleared the space, giving her room to breathe, to hold her child. He didn't say a word, but his hands moved with purpose, like he was clearing away more than just debris. Draven leaned down, his lips brushing Celeste's forehead. "No one can touch someone who's carried the world in her belly," he whispered. The room was quiet now, the weight of it all settling in. The cameras caught every second, but Celeste didn't care. She held her son, her hands steady, despite the pain, the blood, the years of being unseen. She'd never needed their validation. She'd always known who she was. Miranda's empire was dust now. The next morning, her board fired her the news cold and final. Aurelia's sponsorships vanished, her face scrubbed from every campaign. Ryan's career imploded. His live streams deleted his name, a punchline online. They didn't see it coming. They thought they'd won. But truth doesn't bend. It just waits. Celeste didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her son's cry, her husband's hand, the weight of her own silence, it was enough. She'd walked through their fire and come out whole. You know that feeling, don't you? Being judged, dismissed, pushed down. It's heavy, but you're still here. You're still standing. You were never alone. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.